Big news for anyone who loves the history of D-Day. Matt McLachlan Battlefield Tours has just launched a brand new tour that visits the D-Day beaches and lots of other sites in rural France, and all from the comfort of a luxurious cruise on the Seine River. Now, we ran this tour in 2024 and it was a huge success. It sold out in a matter of weeks. So now we've rolled it out again for 2025. But this time, there'll be 3 departures in June, July and September, giving you 3 times the opportunity to join us. The cruise is on board the luxurious Amadeus Diamond and begins and ends in Paris. Over 8 days, you'll enjoy the history, scenery and culture of the beautiful Seine River. But as an exclusive offering just for our passengers, you'll enjoy 2 full days touring the D-Day landing beaches in both the US and British sectors, plus daily seminars on board the ship that unpack the history of D-Day. And like all our tours, you'll be hosted by one of our expert historians who'll bring the story of D-Day to life. And if you've been on one of our tours before, you'll know that our historians really are the best there is. This is an exclusive cruise and places are extremely limited. Visit battlefields.com.au to book your place today.
To make switching to the new Boost Mobile risk-free, we're offering a 30-day money-back guarantee.
So why wouldn't you switch from Verizon or T-Mobile?
Because you have nothing to lose. Boost Mobile is offering a 30-day money-back guarantee.
No, I asked why wouldn't you switch from Verizon or T-Mobile?
Oh.
Wouldn't.
Because you love wasting money as a way to punish yourself because your mother never showed you enough love as a child?
Whoa. Easy there.
Yeah.
Applies to online activations. Requires port in and auto pay. Customers activating in stores may be charged non-refundable activation fees.
I used to think buying foundation online was impossible. How am I supposed to find my shade when I can't even get it right in store? Then I discovered Il Maquillage. I took their AI-powered quiz to find my custom match, and wow, this foundation is literally my skin in a bottle. The undertone and coverage are spot on. It's so neutral and weightless. I can't even tell I'm wearing makeup. Plus, with Try Before You Buy, you can try your full size at home for 14 days. Take the Power Match quiz now at ilmaquillage.com/quiz. ILMAKIAGE.com/quiz.
A Living History production.
I'm Peter Hart.
And I'm Gary Bain.
And together we're Pete and Gary's Military History
Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the podcast. I'm Peter Hart, and I've been joined at my ass again by lovely Gary Bain.
Hello, Pete.
He's the toast of East Finchley.
I'm toasted in East Finchley. Now, I would point out for the lovely listeners that we're both slightly under the weather as we're recording this in the depths of winter.
Oh, it's so cold.
And we've got the usual colds and snuffles and things. So I sound like sort of Barry White. Anyway, that's the best impression I've done.
It is. What are we doing?
Today, it's another one in our series on Third Ypres, or Passchendaele as I like to call it. And this one, and this may be thrown into sort of sharp focus later on, is called Footsloggers in Hell.
I like the word footsloggers.
Yeah, meaning infantry.
Yeah. Oh, yes. All right. Now let's have a little quote to start with. We don't normally do this, but let's set the tone with a voice from the past.
And this is Padre Maurice Murray of the Royal Sussex Regiment. It's a good start. And he says this: Tatham smoked out his pipe, and at last, as we were plunging through mud and filth, he said, "This is what you might call the abomination of desolation, Padre."
How could you get all those words wrong and struggle over Royal Sussex? Wrong, right, I don't know what I'm saying.
More so, perhaps, even than the Somme, Passchendaele has become synonymous with the very worst conditions experienced during the First World War. And in fact, there's that poem, isn't there? I died in hell, they called it Passchendaele.
Yeah, we're fair-minded historians, so we're going to have to say that there are aspects of Mesopotamia and Gallipoli that were pretty bad. And of course, other countries had their own private hells that their troops underwent.
It's a funny name for a private.
It is. But for the British soldiers on the Western Front, I think it didn't get much worse than Passchendaele, did
No,
it?
for the BEF, the men knew it was a grim struggle for survival for all concerned. They remained determined to prevail, but few any longer maintained the zealotry of a crusade against the Hun, demonised by the propagandists earlier in the war.
Yeah, they're operating amidst a landscape that's been literally laid waste. It's inconceivable to anyone who didn't experience at first hand that the soldiers were living in a state of unmitigated purgatory.
And this is Captain Philip Christensen. We've heard from him before.
We have, yeah.
Of the 6th for God's sake, Cameron Highlanders. And he says this.
He used to laugh a lot before he said it.
He did, yes.
This is a serious podcast. Rain, mud, gas shelling and constant bombardment. I'd never seen such a scene, nor thought it possible. The whole country was waterlogged, small spits of muddy land, joined shell holes, great and small, full of water, many with dead men and animals, the stench of which made us retch. In the blinding rain, in the dark, heavily weighted men would slip into a shell hole, a crater, and drown in gas-contaminated mud, often unheeded by their comrades. I found I lost 3 in this way when we reached the front line. Now, I find that an exaggeration. It was normally the wounded that would drown in a shell hole. How do you feel about it? Because this is what we have to do. We have to think about the sources. On the other hand, he says he lost 3. But then...
Irrespective of any of that, I mean, whoever died, a horrific death.
Yeah, and certainly the wounded, it happened to a lot.
Now, the only feasible way of crossing this wasteland, bereft of landmarks and seemingly dissolving into liquid, was by specially constructed tracks. And this is Gunner.
Hang on, that's not in...
Footsloggers.
He's a signaller.
Gunner George Cole of the Royal Field Artillery.
I want to point out he's a Geordie.
Yeah, I'm sure he was.
But you get away with it if you just say "why" at the start.
Why, man? It was one mass of mud and water. In fact, one shell hole ran into another. The only method of getting back and forwards was on a duckboard track. They were laid right from behind, right up to the front line. And I understand that one track, B track, they used to call it, was nearly 2 miles long. They were about 6 foot long and about 2'6" or a yard wide. Slats across and laid on the mud. In some places, where there was a lot of traffic, they used to make them wider, double. They were steady underfoot, and there's sometimes Jerry and his shelling would hit one, and then you had to get across as best you could.
Now, the tracks were laid under the supervision of the Royal Engineers. Yeah, notice the words "under the supervision." Assisted by working parties. Who would they be drawn from, Gary?
The long-suffering infantry, I think, is how we'd put that.
I bet they never complained.
Oh, they might have observed a bit. And this is Private Alfred Griffin of the 9th King's Royal Rifle Corps, and he says this, or observed this, in fact. We used to have to go up on working parties carrying sawn tree trunks, about 2 inches thick, to lay a road through the mud for the Royal Engineers. These logs were coming up with GS wagons.
What does GS stand for?
General Service.
Oh.
And they were dumping them down. We were carrying them up. 2 men to a log, and the REs were putting them down. We laid about 100 yards or so. Jerry waited till we got that done. Then he started to blow it all up again, and he reduced it to splinters. The next day, we went up again. We got a bit further. When we went next morning, that was all in splinters.
That's frustrating, but that's what it was like. Because they could see from the Passchendaele Ridge most of these roads. They could see them and target them. Now, as the German shells searched the rear areas, they're smashing tracks and roadways to pieces. So the Royal Engineers would use anything that came to hand to construct the foundations of the tracks. And it's another Geordie. I remember visiting him. This is an interview I did before you were born, Gary. This is Sapper George Clayton of 175 Tunnelling Company Royal Engineers.
Our job was to make roads or footpaths for the troops to walk on in and out. There was always plenty of bully beef, and there was about 144 tins of bully beef in a box, a strong hardwood box. We used to put them down. They sank down about a couple of foot. It gave a good hard footpath to walk on.
Now, lovely, good old British Army. Now, these tracks, to use an analogy, Gary, they're like the cardiovascular system for the front line. That you can imagine it. You know, you see the maps of the human body, although I don't think I've ever seen a map of a body like yours, but never mind. And everything moving either up or down had to pass along them, and everything's got to be carried by who would that be, Gary?
Working parties of the tired troops. And have you never heard of Ordnance Survey?
So you'd need it.
And this is Major C.L. Fox of 502 Wessex Field Company, Royal Engineers, and he says this.
Our work for a fortnight was to conduct nightly 2 parties of infantry, 150 in each, up a track to pick up 1 duck board per man halfway up, carry them to the end of the track and lay them in position. It was a most unpleasant operation, and one which we were not envied by anybody, as it involved being above ground and unable to take shelter in a heavily shelled area for about 6 to 12 hours every night. A duck board is heavy and cumbersome to carry, especially for a man already loaded with rifle and ammunition, and the rate of progress was dreadfully slow. 1 to 1.5 miles per hour was a good average speed to maintain. It is an incomprehensible fact, but a fact it is, that if a considerable body of men are marching in file or single file, the men at the head of the column may be marching at regulation speed only, but those at the tail will find it necessary to march much faster, or even double in order to keep up. On this duckboard track, a carrying party strung out till it was nearly half a mile long. The last man could never keep pace with the front man, and were constantly passing messages up the front of the line to step short in front or halt in front, whilst those in front, dawdling along with shells dropping round, would growl back, "Close up in rear, hurry up there." Now I want to make this is an interesting phenomenon that you're aware of as well, because there is 2 things about convoys of motor trucks. One is that thing you used to suffer from, convoy cock. And the other thing, Gary, is that the same phenomenon.
The same phenomenon.
Phenomenon.
Phenomenon. Yes, it is. And
no one understands it who's not a math.
I noticed that the people at the rear of that column had a different accent to the people at the front of that.
Well, it's because time had passed so much.
Oh, I see. Now, for the infantry fatigue parties, they filled their nights, and many survived the murderous battles in the front line, only to be killed whilst ostensibly on rest, having been commandeered for the ubiquitous working on carrying parties. That you'd be pretty cheesed off with that.
I would be cheesed off. I'd be cheesed off if I was killed at any time.
Yeah, that's true. Now, throughout the campaign, new battalions of men were marched forward along these continually renewed tracks into the very moor, Pete, spelled M-A-W, of the German guns. And this is Second Lieutenant Robert Johnson of 16th Royal Scots.
Scottish, eh?
Yeah, he's from Edinburgh. And he said this: each man and officer carried a rifle and bayonet. Great coats were worn, small haversack with mess tins on back, full pouches of ammunition, 170 rounds, and an extra bandolier of 50 rounds per man. 3 sandbags tied on the back of the belt, a full water bottle, 2 grenades and a pick or shovel on the back, as well as the entrenching tool and gas respirator at the alert, i.e. worn on the chest, and a spare PH helmet, anti-gas and made of flannel with iron mouthpieces, across the body. Every soldier carried sewn inside the front of his tunic on the right-hand side a first aid dressing, consisting of a bandage, an ampoule of iodine, and a safety pin, all inside a cotton envelope. My signallers carried, instead of picks, the D3 telephone and rolls of telephone cable. The rule of the road was that downed traffic had precedence, that is, wounded men and runners, men with messages and orders, as well as troops relieved after duty in the front line, kept to the track, while carrying parties going forward and relieving troops got off the track to enable those downward bound free passage.
Now, that's it's worthy of Taft Gillingham, the detail it puts in there. But what's interesting is, again, people will say they carried too much. What would you leave behind?
Well, exactly. What are you going to leave behind?
You're going to leave...
You're going to leave your gas mask behind?
No. Rifle?
No. Ammunition?
No, probably not. No.
Water? How about the water? You don't need water, do you?
It's just, it's just as it is. Anyway, every night the German shells would claim new victims from the thousands of men who passed up and down these tracks. Is it directly aim fire? Can they see them at night?
No. It's random shots and they're fired speculatively, and a man's survival was purely dependent on good fortune. Those victims whose luck deserted them just lay where they'd fallen.
Now, this is Private William Collins. He was our Royal Army Medical Corps, and I interviewed him in about 1986, and he was in a flat just near Euston Station. He was an amazing old boy. Anyway, he said this: every morning we used to go up this duckboard track from below Businga right up to Langamar. We were stepping over a couple of dead men laid across the track because they couldn't be moved into the side. They'd have been sucked into the mud. They were collected by the Pioneer Party and buried later on. It was a nightmare because all you had was a couple of duckboards side by side, and either side of it was about 10 feet of mud, with the top of a tank sticking out of it here and there. If you fell off, it would take a traction engine almost to pull you out. It was that deep, sucking mud. There's a memorial on the Penmenning Gate to 60,000 men whose bodies were never recovered in that small Ypres salient. They were all sucked into the mud. The track stopped at Langamar. The place had been flattened to the ground, and there was a board at the side of the road, propped up, and on it was stencilled, "This was Langemark." That was the only evidence that there was a town ever stood there. You couldn't see a building or a tree as far as the eye could see. What a great boy he was, old boy.
Picture this: you're halfway through a DIY car fix, tools scattered everywhere, and boom, you realise you're missing a part. It's okay, because you know whatever it is, it's on eBay. They've got everything: brakes, headlights, cold air intakes, whatever you need. And it's guaranteed to fit, which means no more crossing your fingers and hoping you ordered the right thing. All the parts you need at prices you'll love. Guaranteed to fit every time. eBay. Things people love.
Romance is in the air for Valentine's Day. And when you're ready to pop the question, all you need is the perfect moment to come around. And, of course, the ring. At BlueNile.com, you can find thousands of natural and lab-grown diamonds, plus legendary service from Blue Nile's jewelry experts, who can answer every question, help you design a custom ring, and even plan the proposal. So seize the day today. Right now, you can save up to 50% at BlueNile.com. That's BlueNile.com.
If there's one thing that my family and friends know me for, it's being an amazing gift giver. I owe it all to Celebrations Passport from 1-800-Flowers.com, my one-stop shopping site that has amazing gifts for every occasion. With Celebrations Passport, I get free shipping on thousands of amazing gifts. And the more gifts I give, the more perks and rewards I earn. To learn more and take your gift giving to the next level, visit 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST.
Hey there, Ryan Reynolds here. It's a new year, and you know what that means. No, not the diet. Resolutions. A way for us all to try and do a little bit better than we did last year. And my resolution, unlike big wireless, is to not be a raging and raise the price of wireless on you every chance I get. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited. See mintmobile.com for details.
The presence of countless corpses in various stages of putrefaction littered across the battlefield gave the whole salient a lingering stench of death. And this is Private Alfred Griffin of the 9th King's Royal Rifle Corps. Oh, a terrible, horrible smell. There's nothing like a dead body smell. It's a putrid, decaying smell. Makes you stop breathing. You think of disease. It's a smell you can't describe unless you've smelt rotten meat. You've got the smell right under your nose all the time. And if there's one at the bottom of the trench and you keep walking over it, the black slime comes out. And that's not pleasant.
Now, sometimes, after there's been a big attack or a lot of shelling, the corpses are beyond counting. It's just... And then you've got to bury them. But when you bury them, they get blown up again and scattered about the battlefield again. And it's just awful, awful. So driven by necessity, what do the British troops do?
Well, they tried to press the former German pillboxes into use as relatively secure headquarters. And this is, as you're rightly pointing out, this is a signaller. This is Signaller Sidney Fuller.
Yeah, he's infantry.
He's infantry of 8th Battalion Suffolk Regiment. And he says this, Pete.
Battalion headquarters and signallers were in a concrete dugout or pillbox with a roof about 4 foot thick. This pillbox was oblong in shape, divided into 2 compartments. It had wooden doors and shutters over the windows, both doors and shutters being covered with sheet steel. Not shit steel, Gary. Sheet steel. On the interior walls, floor and roof were marks made by Mills bombs, no doubt made when the pillbox was captured. A large crack ran round the wall just under the ceiling, as if the roof had been lifted by the explosion of the bombs, but the structure was otherwise intact, in spite of the shelling it had been subjected to. You can still see these in some of the fields at Ypres.
Yeah, you can. Now, such pillboxes, despite the evidence that others had died there, still offered a welcome degree of security and the sense of a relative safe haven from the storms of the battlefield. And this is 2nd Lieutenant Douglas McMurtry, 7th Somerset Light Infantry. I laid down and lit up my pipe. The feeling of security which I always felt when in a good pillbox was great after the hazardous life in an open trench. And I don't think I have ever enjoyed a pipe more than I did that night, feeling warm and secure after the nervy journey.
Yeah, but the Germans, cunning devils, or actually it's just practicality, they're not actually that secure. Why
well, in some cases, the Germans have thought ahead, cunning Germans
cunning
that they
devils.
And in constructing their defences. And you're going to tell us what Private William Collins of the Royal Army Medical Corps says.
The pillbox had a wonderful field of fire looking over where our people attacked from. But I noticed one thing. The Germans are as clever as cats. The back of the pillbox facing the German line was paper thin. All the rest of the pillbox was 2 feet thick. So if we attempted to use it, they could put a shell right through the box, if they were accurate enough. And I'm not entirely sure how true that is, but that's what he thought.
Nevertheless, despite the consequences of such an eventuality, most pillboxes still provided at least some degree of protection from the relentless German shell fire raining down upon them. And this is Lieutenant Colonel Norman MacLeod from Edinburgh of the 7th Cameron Highlanders. I have no idea where he's from. The headquarters at one time were in an old Boche strong point. Unfortunately, as it was the only place protected, some of the men in the trench round about it would rush to it for shelter whenever heavy shelling started. As many as possible squeezed inside, but it seldom contained all, and it was no doubt the enemy's target. We had several casualties in the trench outside. It was little use telling the men not to come, for each hoped to be fortunate enough to find room inside, and the desire for security overmastered all else. The floor of the dugout was a foot deep in water, which kept getting slowly deeper as the water in the trench increased, and its smell was horrible, as it was partly mixed with the blood of the men killed outside.
Now, a direct hit on a pillbox, I can't imagine what it was like, but it must have been a traumatic experience. But if you compare it, so if you're in a shell hole or a trench and a shell lands near you, you've had it. But it is survivable if you're in a pillbox. And this is what Signaller S. Bradbury of the 1st, 5th Seaforth Highlanders said. About 8 o'clock in the evening, Fritz commenced a terrific bombardment along our front, and everyone immediately withdrew to the shelter of the concrete pillboxes. That's exactly what MacLeod said, which became very overcrowded. The bombardment lasted for about 2 hours and was so intense that no living thing could have escaped being hit out in the open. Scores of hits were made on the pillboxes, which shook with terrific concussion, and it was impossible to keep a light lit. Consequently, we were all crowded together in the darkness. As there was no door to the structure, it was possible to see the firework display which was taking place. For some reason, the enemy had suddenly got the window for the lights of every colour being sent up into the sky, and these, with the flashes of the bursting shells, made a very impressive spectacle, but still not one which anybody wished to step outside to enjoy. One or two men stood nearest the doorway. The doorway's clearly been blown off, or there was no door, it's a tunnel thing. Were wounded owing to a shell bursting just outside the entrance. When the bombardment was about at its height, someone shouted, "Gas!" with the result that all was confusion. Most of us, contrary to orders, had laid aside our gas helmets, and now, when they were wanted, it It was impossible in the darkness to lay hands on them. The panic caused by the alarm gave rise to a free fight in the darkness for possession of gas masks. The alarm, however, proved to be false, as the gas was not the dangerous sort, but tear gas shells. And very soon we were all crying with tears running down our cheeks and eyes smarting. Oh no, let's leave it at tear gas. But can you imagine in the dark when somebody shouts gas?
Even a near miss from one of the heavy calibre shells could, however, have dramatic effects. And this is Signaller Guy Buckridge of the 37th Divisional Signal Company. And he says this: the pillbox was tilted over by a 9-inch shell which exploded just outside. It would have fallen door down and drowned us all, but it righted itself again before it lost its balance. All night the enemy made a shambles of this place, and gradually the pillbox filled with water until we had about 2 foot depth over which we lived, ate and slept. It smelt of gas and dead bodies and turned one's stomach over. However, we escaped being casualties and remained sane.
I've no idea how they remain sane in circumstances like that.
We've been down into pillboxes, haven't we? And you get, occasionally you get a horrible smell, but can you imagine the smells they're describing? It must have been horrific just being inside.
And they're often flooded with 6 inches of water on the floor, but can you imagine living in them with just 2 foot?
Yeah, awful. Now, every night, ration parties went back to local supply dumps in the rear areas to collect food for the men at the front.
That must have been a hell of a job.
The Germans knew exactly what routes they had to follow and shelled at random throughout the night. Good old Germans. It was largely a matter of good fortune whether they caught the ration party or not. One party, led by Lieutenant George Horridge, they ran out of luck. And this is Lieutenant George Horridge of the 1st 5th Lancashire Regiment.
Now, we know him because he was at Gallipoli.
Lancashire Fusiliers.
Oh, sorry, yeah. We interviewed him. He was with...
the song.
Yeah. Homeland, homeland, when will I see you again? Land
Yeah, we don't have to sing it all.
All right. But he sang that song about Gallipoli, and we often play it when we're at a cemetery because it's very emotional, isn't it?
Can you hear that on the Imperial War Museum website?
Don't know.
Oh, right. I'm glad I asked you.
He was still with the 1st 5th Lancashire Fusiliers, and he said this: the ration party consisted of 2 pies, and we'd arrived at this trench. At the side of the trench was a steel plate about 9 feet long by 3 feet wide, which somebody had put up. The first party were dumping the rations against this steel plate. I was on one end of it, another officer was in the middle, and another at the left. We were watching the rations being dumped. I happened to look up to the right, and I could see shadowy forms coming. I said, "Hello, here's a second ration party. I'll give them a shout, tell them we're here." I took two steps, not more, and a big shell fell on the plate I'd been leaning against. A tremendous flash, and I was blown down against the side of the trench. I picked myself up, realising that as far as I knew, that nothing had hit me. There was a dead silence. I said, Mr. Maston, Mr. Hudson here." They were the 2 officers who'd been with me. No reply. Then a sort of hubbub broke out. This shell had not only killed the 2 officers, it had killed 4 of the ration party, one of whom had both legs blown off and wounded 8 others. The whole thing was a terrible shock. We had to get the wounded away in the dark, and we knew the gun was pointing at the same place and might fire another shot at any time. I think I had a certain amount of shell shock, because when we got them away and everything had gone quiet again, I went and found an old pillbox and lay down in the corner. I stayed there for 24 hours, more or less asleep or out. I don't remember very much about it. It was a terrible shock. Bloody hell.
Given the surrounding decrepitude, it's an interesting word.
Actually, looking at you, I see it made flesh.
And ready availability of raw corpse flesh.
Wish I hadn't said that.
It was inevitable that some sectors of the battlefield were infested with rats. Rats as big as cats.
Yeah, that's the old myth, isn't it?
Yeah. Now, this is Corporal Harry Hopthrow, Signal Service Royal Engineers. There were a hell of a lot of rats, and they were very, very tame. The first night I was there, I felt a bump on my stomach. I'd hung up my water bottle and tied to it was my iron rations, a tin of bully beef, some tea, and some very, very thick dog biscuits. And that was hanging over my bed. At one time I thought a rat had gone onto the bed and jumped up, but I think really what happened was the rat came down the cord of my water bottle, ripped open the bag, and the bully beef had dropped on me. If you got anywhere near them and pushed them, they didn't move any more than was necessary to get rid of the push and keep on eating whatever they were eating. They always found bits of food about. They were big rats and very tame. I don't know whether I liked them, but you got used to this particular variety. They didn't seem to attempt to bite, at least I never got bitten anyway. Once I saw some rats in a hole, and I'd got a field gun cartridge, and it had got some of the cordite in it. I put a match to it and shot it into the hole. There were far more in it than I expected, and I had to run because of the threatened explosion.
To make switching to the new Boost Mobile risk-free, we're offering a 30-day money-back guarantee.
So why wouldn't you switch from Verizon or T-Mobile?
Because you have nothing to lose. Boost Mobile is offering a 30-day money-back guarantee.
No, I asked why wouldn't you switch from Verizon or T-Mobile?
Oh.
Wouldn't.
Because you love wasting money as a way to punish yourself because your mother never showed you enough love as a child?
Whoa. Easy there.
Yeah.
Applies to online activations. Requires port in and auto pay. Customers activating in stores may be charged non-refundable activation fees.
If there's one thing that my family and friends know me for, it's being an amazing gift giver. I owe it all to Celebrations Passport from 1-800-Flowers.com, my one-stop shopping site that has amazing gifts for every occasion. With Celebrations Passport, I get free shipping on thousands of amazing gifts. And the more gifts I give, the more perks and rewards I earn. To learn more and take your gift giving to the next level, visit 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST.
Sounds dangerous, doesn't it? Now, even more irritating. What's more irritating than rats? Now, I know what you're going to say.
Well, you're going to think I'm going to say you are.
I was thinking that.
Yes, the ubiquitous lice which crawled across their bodies in droves.
That's lovely. And this is Private Joseph Pickard of the 4th Northumberland Fusiliers. Aye. When a new draft came out, they would say they didn't intend to have any lice. We used to just laugh and say, "Oh, all right, we'll wait and see." Shortly after, we'd find them rubbing their shoulders up against the trench, and I'd ask them what was the matter. They'd say, "Oh, me skin isn't feeling so good." But they had lice all right. When you were out of the line, everybody used to strip off and go down all the seams of your jacket with a candle or a needle. You were nearly walking sometimes, but you couldn't do any. They were all
with lice. Yeah.
But you couldn't do anything about them. Your blankets were all infested. Very odd times we got a bath. If you were lucky and the engineers were there, they would set some baths up. This is behind the line. As you went in, you dropped all you had, left them outside as you went in. There were old wine casks, cut in two. Maybe there was hot water in, maybe there wasn't. I stepped into one that was cold. Gosh, truth! Mine, it was a good job I was young and healthy. Then you had a bath, and when you come out, they give you a new set of underclothes. By the time you'd marched back to your billet, you were lousy again. You couldn't kill them.
Now, the normal bodily functions of life had to go on.
What are these bodily functions?
And primitive latrines were established as and where possible. And once more, you're going to tell us what Private Joseph Pickard of the 1st 4th Northumberland Fusiliers says. He was Scottish, was he?
He was Geordie. Anyway, there would be a little trench dug off the main trench, a pole and a hole. 9 times out of 10, there was a field card. Beware of sniper. There were so many people going up and down, and somebody would take notice. He means a German. And wait on them and shoot them. Nobody ever thinks about it. But as you go up the trench, you brush a little bit of soil away. It was tramped in, and the floor was coming up. You didn't notice it. So gradually, you start to show the top of your head.
Top of your head, yeah.
Ooh.
Given the nature of the fighting, casualties could occur all over the battlefield at any time of the day and night. Stretcher bearers were constantly on call, but in many cases, particularly during major attacks, isolated wounded could wait for long periods of time before help arrived, and when it did, it was often too late. And you're going to tell us what Lieutenant Gilbert Fleming... You're working very hard.
Yes.
What Lieutenant Gilbert Fleming of 7th Battalion Rifle Brigade says.
At some stage of the fighting in the last few days, a line of rifle pits had been dug by our men. From one of these, a few yards short of my platoon's post, I thought I heard groans, and I went out with a stretcher bearer to see what could be done. We found in one of these pits 4 men sitting, their legs all tangled in the middle. One began to talk deliriously. One could talk sense and stated that the other 2 were dead. Any attempt to move them, the live or the dead, only raised cries of pain, as the living were both wounded in the leg as well as elsewhere, and had been there helpless for 2 days. We had to give up the job for the moment, but later I got up another stretcher bearer from the company headquarters, and they got them out at last, in time to get them away before morning. The delirious man died on the way. The other reached the battalion aid post, at least in safety, so he may have survived. Can you imagine lying out in the rain and mud and...
The pain suffered by the severely wounded could be indescribable and could occasionally force a moral dilemma. And this is what Sergeant Joe Fitzpatrick of the 2nd 6th Manchester Regiment says. Before we got to the front line, a shell dropped amongst our lads, and one got very, very badly wounded. He was screaming out, "Shoot me, Sergeant, shoot me! The pain, shoot me!" Well, I would have done. I'd have helped him out. He was in that much pain. I'd have pulled my revolver out and shot him, but I didn't want any witnesses. You don't know how far it would have gone. Myself, personally, I would have done, definitely. And if I'd been badly wounded, I'd have shot myself to save any time and trouble.
That's a terrible quote. I remember interviewing him. I interviewed a lot of these guys. If they weren't wounded or killed, then eventually the unit would be moved back out of line on rest. And it's normally 3 days in the line, that's all. And in these circumstances, even a soldier would tolerate minor discomforts fairly cheerfully, most unlike them. And this, again, is Signaller Sidney Fuller of the 8th Suffolk Regiment. He said, "About noon, we were ordered to prepare for a move at 2:30 p.m. when the buses would be ready for us. We were ready on time, not half, but the buses were late, so we had to wait 2 hours. The buses turned out to be ordinary lorries, and there was quite a crush. I was unable to get a seat and had to stand on a tailboard, hoping the chains would not break. Started at 4:40 p.m. The enemy was shelling one of our balloons near Dickiebush, and when we were halfway through that village, one of the shells burst near us. We heard the bullets whiz all round us, but no one was hit. Rather an uncomfortable ride for me, standing all the way and getting covered with dust, but under the circumstances, I did not mind that." Yeah, he's obviously been taken from further back in line. I ought to realise it's a long journey out of the line, and that's the later stage of the journey.
They moved back into billets in the villages of the west of Ypres, and this is once more Lieutenant Gilbert Fleming of the 7th Rifle Brigade.
It was a typical billet for the neighbourhood. It was a very large farm, and 2 company of us, officers and men, were accommodated there. We officers had a big downstairs room for a mess and slept up in the loft. The men were in the barns and stables, and a small number in tents out in the meadow. We were warned not to expect a long rest, and had plenty to do in the way of baths, reclothing, re-equipping, etc. However, I found time to visit Balliol, I can't say that, one afternoon.
Now, away at last from snipers, machine guns and shells, the men relaxed, seeking solace and comfort in the familiarity of old routines. And once more, this is 2nd Lieutenant Douglas McMurtry of 7th Somerset Light Infantry. I got the men into the farm nearby, saw that they got tea and their rum rations, and then went to find my own tent. My servant had got a canvas bed already and had put out my things. There was a pile of letters and a parcel of kit. The first night, after being in the line, getting into pyjamas and a warm valise was very much appreciated. Felice.
Well, possibly. Oh, dear. Yeah, they're still not safe. Blimey. What? They're exhausted, they are. Exhausted soldiers. They're just staying in their billet. They're out of artillery range. What am I gibbering on about? What else could get them?
Well, German bombers are seeking them out.
What, hand bombers?
Bombers.
Oh, aerial ones.
Aerial bombers, yes. And this is Signaller Gerald Dennis, 21st King's Royal Rifle Corps. About an hour before lights out, as we stood in groups round the field, we heard the unmistakable throbbing of enemy planes. The drone of Bosch aero engines was quite different from ours. I leaned my back against a large tree that grew a few yards from my tent and looked towards the sound of the aircraft. Our anti-aircraft guns were busy when suddenly I heard a crash as a bomb burst some 5 fields away. Crash, 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 as other bombs exploded nearer and nearer to our field. Before the last crash, some of the men had flung themselves into their tents and lay flat, whilst I remained standing against the tree so that it stood between me and the bombs. Now, I know somebody else who hid behind a tree when we found that live 75 shell.
That you kicked?
That I kicked, yeah. And
it was me?
Yes, it was you, yes. And you'd have died full of splinters.
I would have died, yeah. How would you have died?
Quickly. Now, relatively ineffective air raids were infuriating and strangely disturbing for men used to hell on earth at the front. And once more, this is Second Lieutenant Douglas McMurtry, 7th Somerset Light Infantry. It was a good day. German aeroplanes were continually coming over night and day and dropping bombs all around us, killing horses and men. Somehow it was much worse for the nerves to have a good chance of being bombed when out at rest than having the same chance in the line where one expected such unpleasant things.
Now, rest period, it was treasured, wasn't it? You can just imagine, it might be your last, but it offers a chance to live, to experience a greater or lesser pleasures, all that life has to offer. What can I be thinking? For perhaps the last time. And this is Lieutenant Cyril Lawrence, 1st Australian Field Company. Now, he's Australian, but I'm foregoing the pleasure of that accent because a lot of this podcast has been quite serious, so we'll keep it. I'm living at a chateau, and yesterday Higgins, what a great chum, and Self took the 2 daughters of the place for a walk into the neighbouring town. We hardly saw a soul, and yet last night I guarantee that every French farm within miles had the news. Jingo, it is funny. Wherever the boys went, they were told about 2 officers promenading with the 2 mademoiselles from the chateau. My fancy, the smaller of the 2, is called Marguerite. Mother, she's just glorious. Not exceptionally beautiful, perhaps, except her eyes, but with a daintiness and charm of manner, the like of which one could never find in any English girl. As timid as a gazelle, and as perfect in her simplicity as the flower whose name she bears. And talk about snuggle. She's the finest snuggler that I've ever met. How would you like a French daughter-in-law? But there, don't worry, I would never summon up the courage to ask her.
Snuggler.
Right.
Now, not all the men were content with such delicate sipping from the jug of life.
What? What are you on?
Some of the men took great quaffs and spilt it wherever they pleased.
And I'd like to thank my old boss at the War Museum, Anthony Richards, who I remember when me and Nigel Steele were writing our book, Passchendaele, The Sacrificial Ground, which you can still buy, Gary, and is the basis of these podcasts. But I remember he found this quote and he said, shame you can't use that, it's far too rude. We used it.
And this is Captain Charles Dudley Ward, 1st Welsh Guards. Before we left, there occurred something which I must note because of its humour, though it is the humour of a Rabelais or the Decameron. My part in it was nil, and beyond hearing a squeal and much screaming of angry women, I know nothing beyond what Percy Batty told me. It appears he was wakened by an old man who lives in the farm, and the 2 women I have referred to as strumpets, the latter in their nightdresses. The old man could speak no English and was too frightened and excited to attempt French, so the women translated his Flemish into bad English and French. He was going round the farm, locking up, and had reached a pig stall in the stable, where he said he heard the pig grunting. He was about to lock up when the door burst open and a man dressed only in a shirt ran out and disappeared into the night. He was sure it was one of our men. And then both women, shouting at once, accused one of our men of behaving indecently with the pig. Batty turned out the guard, the servants and some corporals and hunted high and low for the beast, but found no one. All he discovered was that a wild figure had run past the sentry. He put out extra sentries to watch for the man and went to bed. This morning, the mother of the 2 women, a fearfully evil old hag, triumphantly produced a slipper, which she said had been found in the pig house. Again, she urged Batty to find the wretch who had sunk to such depths as to have an affair with a pig. To cut the story short, they discovered that the only man who possessed such slippers was the canteen man of another regiment. This man was brought before him, and then in an agony of nervousness, the man conferred that, though appearances were dead against him, it was the girls he was concerned with in the pig house, and not the pig. Then Percy, with true Sherlock Holmes perspicacity, remembered the night dresses he had seen these two creatures in, and that they bore traces of the farmyard.
It's true.
Such raw and earthly images probably had more in common with the desperate urges of men under sentence of death.
I noticed that me and Nigel had a lot more purple prose than I do now. Well, there we go. So we've done the infantry and one signaller gunner. What are we doing next week, Gary?
Well, I should imagine it's something to do with Third Ypres.
You're right. It's the artillery gunners.
Is that full of infantrymen?
Probably. Cheers, Gazza.
Cheers, Pete. Oh, and Merry Christmas all.
That's about a month ago.
Yeah, I know.
Cheers. Thanks for listening to the show.
Blah, blah, blah.
If you'd like to support us,
blah,
you can now buy us a coffee.
Blah,
Visit www.buymeacoffee.com/PGMH.
Or visit www.blah.
And we'd be jolly grateful.
Cheers.
To everyone else, this is a desk. But to you, it's a launch pad. Your starting block. This ain't a desk. This is opportunity.
Switch to Boost Mobile and get the Coach Prime Moto G 5G on us at your local Boost retailer. Moto G 5G on us when you switch with ID verification and new Unlimited Plus or Unlimited Premium plan activation. Taxes extra. All prices, fees, features, functionality, and offers are subject to change without notice. See participating dealers for details.
There's one thing that will forever change the way you sleep, and it's the softest 100% organic cotton bedding from Boll & Branch. You'll fall asleep faster wrapped in the most luxurious comfort. You'll never sleep hot again with airy blankets, cloud-like duvets, and breathable sheets. You'll experience pure comfort on night one and feel your bedding get softer with every wash. Discover the difference with 15% off your first order at bollandbranch.com with code BUTTERY. Exclusions apply. See site for details.
Everyone's entitled to their own opinion. But some opinions are more useful than others. And we all want the good ones. The ones that shake things up, spark debates, and change minds. Financial Times readers know that their opinions are reliable because they're shaped by trusted journalism. Robust opinions, confident decisions. Source FT. To subscribe, go to ft.com/sourceft.
Thanks for listening. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook to learn more about each episode. And if you'd like to support the podcast, you have a couple of options. You can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/PGMH, or consider subscribing to the podcast for only £2 per month and get ad-free listening and bonus content. You can find links for both on our Facebook and Twitter accounts.
Sounds great, doesn't it?